Why is there something rather than nothing? Of all the questions humanity has ever asked, this might be the most profound. Why does anything exist at all? Why is there a
Right.
universe, a reality, rather than absolute nothingness?
This is a classic question, and it basically gets into something called metaphysical contingency versus necessity. So, it gets into things like modal logic and modal metaphysics. So, to say that something exists necessarily is to say that it has to exist. Its non-existence is literally impossible. It's impossible for it not to exist. So its existence follows to a point of logical necessity. Right? To say something is metaphysically contingent is to say that that thing can possibly exist. Its existence is not impossible. It could exist, but it's not necessary either. It doesn't have to either, right? And so something can be actual and contingent, so it actually exists, but it also could have not existed. But it can also be, non-existent yet still possible, right? In both of those scenarios, you're talking about an existence that could be, but also could not be. And then you have these kind of two, and that's sort of in between these two extremes of impossible existence, something that cannot possibly exist, like a round circle or a four-sided triangle or a married bachelor. Those just cannot possibly exist. Then you have the idea of something that necessarily must exist. Um, but so what's being kind of observed here and pointed out here is that if you look at the totality of the observable universe, all of the totality of space and time and matter and energy, all of the observable universe, all of space and time and matter and energy would all appear to be metaphysically contingent, right? It would all appear to be a conglomerate of stuff that certainly can exist and in fact does, but it doesn't necessarily have to either. It could have not existed. And when we make that observation, suddenly we're left with a real issue that deals with things like causation, where if something doesn't have to exist, if it merely could only possibly exist, then it seems its existence, it doesn't explain itself. It seems we need to start appealing to some external third cause to, or not third, or just some external cause in order to explain its existence. We need to identify some variable or factor that accounts for why, of these two equally possible options of existence and non-existence, why did it go the existence route, right? But the idea of something that's metaphysically necessary is to say something that it has to exist by definition and therefore requires no additional explanation. It explains itself. So this is a classic question that's getting at something. It's pointing at what would the proper term would be the contingent, the metaphysically contingent nature of the observable universe. It just simply doesn't explain itself. Oh, I need to open up.
Why doesn't it all look like this? Hello? Hello? The German philosopher Gottfried
Yes,
Leibniz famously
Leibniz.
asked this very question,
Mm-hmm.
concluding that there must be a necessary being,
Yep.
something that
It's
exists by its
exactly what
own
we were just
nature.
talking about.
Many religious traditions take
So yeah, that was an important mention. If he hadn't brought it up, I would have brought it up myself. Leibniz, famous 17th century German philosopher. He was in the Cartesian school, along with figures like Malebranche and Spinoza. Leibniz, amongst those figures, was amongst a line of philosophers in the 17th century who immediately followed Descartes and Descartes' significant influence in our thought to be in the Cartesian school. Um, but anyway, Leibniz, some of that very language we were just discussing, contingency versus necessity, this comes from, it doesn't exclusively originate from Leibniz. Leibniz certainly popularized that language, and indeed, he had an argument for why, therefore, you have to have a necessary being. It was some of the stuff we were just talking about, that if the totality of everything in existence is only ever contingent, then this means that you just have a bunch of contingencies dependent on each other that just bottoms out without any sort of first cause or without any sort of basis for their existence or explanation for why they exist and not exist. And even if the contingent things run on infinitely, some people might go that route and say, well, it's just an infinite series of causes. It just goes back infinite, and there's no real explanation beyond that. But even that doesn't make sense, because even if you had an infinite set of contingent objects, well, now you need to account for the existence of the infinite set, right? The infinite set of contingent things is itself contingent and still can't explain itself. And so this is why Leibniz argued you have to have at least one necessary being that must exist by definition as a foundation for all these contingent beings. And again, if we note the observable universe, nothing in the observable universe, space and time and matter and energy and the particular laws of nature, none of them have to be the way they are or have to be at all. They're all contingent. And if that's the case, then this is why the direction this video is going. This is why some people start to point towards things like a divine cause, or things like, or even make this into an argument for God. In fact, Aquinas's third way is effectively a contingency argument. It's for this reason, to say that you cannot find a self-sufficient explanation for existence within the observable nature, and thus you have to appeal to a supernatural, but not supernatural in the way people use that word commonly today, as like mythological or something, but supernatural. Super is Latin for above, right? So supernatural, literally above nature, or that is metaphysical, right? Beyond the physical. And that's the route this video is going. But let's continue.
Take this as an argument for God. But not everyone agrees. Bertrand Russell dismissed it
Yep,
outright,
that's correct.
saying the universe simply is, and there's no further explanation needed, which is a quite boring and unimaginative answer if you ask me.
Yeah, me too. That's actually the proper term for that would be called brute facts. This was Bertrand Russell's view, that there are just certain brute facts of nature. And what does that mean, a brute fact? It just means a fact that is, and there is really no explanation for it. It just simply is, by the brute fact of its factuality. It just simply is, right? And that's what he would just say, is that there are just these certain brute facts of nature, and there's nothing more to it. But I agree with the narrator here. I think that's a very intellectually unsatisfying answer. And it's one that many people take issue with and don't accept. But I will point out, notice it's kind of interesting, Bertrand Russell has to go that sort of weird route in order to, I just noticed the meme, that's funny, my job here is done, but you didn't do anything. Yeah, exactly. Just, well, they're just brute facts. They don't require explanations. I mean, okay, but it's interesting Russell has to go that route, and this is why, there can be in philosophy, there are a lot of people who study philosophy who end up converting, to some form of theism, because when you really study physics and metaphysics, and especially metaphysics, and get to the underlying basis of reality, there can be some very, very intellectually compelling justifications for accepting some kind of a classical theistic worldview, but maybe a topic for another video.
Modern physics, however, offers other possibilities. The Big Bang Theory suggests our universe had a beginning, but what came before it? Some physicists argue that quantum mechanics allows for something to emerge from nothing, an unstable vacuum state that inevitably produces existence.
But that actually does not answer the question, though. That doesn't answer the question, because then again, if you're just appealing now to this, okay, unstable vacuum state that can produce, okay, but then why was there an unstable vacuum state capable of producing existence rather than no unstable vacuum state capable of producing existence at all? Why was there anything, any component to reality whatsoever? You're just kind of delaying the ultimate question. This happens a lot in science, where people struggle to explain things, and then they come up with these natural and physical explanations that kind of further dissect the exact mechanistic physical phenomena going on, and they kind of provide a further more a more detailed description of exactly all the natural processes unfolding. But at no point are we actually approaching the metaphysical question, which again is the fundamentally contingent nature of existence, or observable that is natural observable existence in the physical world. Why was there an unstable vacuum state with this certain property that you would seem to be at that point assigning a certain property, this property of being capable of leading to existence? But that property is a something. right? It's not really a proper nothing at that point if it's a nothingness with a property capable of leading to something. So if you're going to assign this property to the nothingness, it's no longer a nothingness and instead becomes a something on some level that is also contingent in its nature. Because why have this property of being an unstable vacuum state capable of leading to existence rather than no property at all? So it doesn't really answer the question. It's because I don't think it's a question that can be answered scientifically. I think it's a question that warrants more of a philosophical inquiry.
Others propose that our universe is just one of many in an infinite multiverse,
Oh,
removing the need for a singular
God.
cause. Still, these explanations only push the question further. Why do these laws of
Yes, that's
physics
exactly right.
exist in the first?
No, that's exactly right. Thank you for getting to that. Why are these laws? And also, I just wanted to make a quick point on this. I call it the Marvel Cinematic Multiverse. And by that, it's kind of a joking name. I don't literally mean like the Marvel Cinematic Universe or whatever. I mean, these kinds of multiverse theories are very, very popular right now in pop culture, and we see them in our culture and our fiction and our media all the time nowadays, like in the Marvel Cinematic Universe, for example. But it's interesting because actually, in a lot of actual scholarship, even in the hard sciences, in like physics, for example, a lot of this multiverse theory stuff is a bit in string theory and M theory. It's considered a bit dated now, and it's under increasing heavy criticism. It's nowhere near as it's it's nowhere near as accepted as it used to be. Or well, maybe a better way to put it is a lot more controversial of a theory than it used to be. And so it's interesting in the scholarship, the whole Marvel Cinematic Multiverse stuff has been sort of on the decline, but yet at the same time it's more popular than ever in our pop culture. I have major issues with it though because again, we have this same issue here of just delaying the ultimate question, of just pushing the ultimate question back a step. Let's suppose that the observable universe around us is just one of an infinite series of universes. This still begs the question, why is there an infinite multiverse rather than nothing at all? The multiverse itself is contingent, back to that contingency versus necessity thing. There's nothing about an infinite multiverse that has to exist. Why is there any infinite multiverse at all? Even if you've now explained why this one observable universe around us exists, oh, because it's just a part of this bigger infinite multiverse. You haven't explained. So then why is there this big, infinitely more complex layer of existence behind it? The multiverse would be contingent, and it just simply does not answer the ultimate question at hand. So that's my issue with it, and that's why I call it the Marvel Cinematic Multiverse theory stuff, to kind of mock it a little bit.
First place? Why not nothing? Perhaps, as Martin Heidegger
Exactly.
suggested, this is
Ooh, I
simply
love
the
Heidegger.
fundamental question of existence, one we may never truly answer. But one thing is clear.
My thesis advisor, sorry, I'm drinking a little water. My thesis advisor was did his dissertation on Heidegger. I'm a pretty big Heideggerian, and he always likes to describe Heidegger as a monomaniac about being. Heidegger was in the phenomenological tradition after figures like Husserl, but he didn't like Husserl's epoche. That is like just kind of putting the existential question aside and just saying we're not going to really engage in questions of what the ontological status is of intentional objects. We're just going to analyze our subjective, intentional relation to them. But Heidegger was much more fascinated with wanting to bring phenomenology and more broadly philosophy back to this fundamental question of being. And everything comes back to this fundamental question of being, the most fundamental question of being. There's a long history of that in philosophy, going back to the ancient Greeks, going back to pre-Socratics even. What is the arche, the first principle of reality? That was what all the pre-Socratics were constantly obsessed with. I think Heidegger's philosophical instincts were right on point with that one, and I agree with Heidegger on that. And yeah, and that's what sometimes some of this scientism stuff, it kind of just conveniently brushes some of these ultimate questions of being aside to just give us these descriptions of how natural phenomena unfold, but without really engaging with the fundamental question of something like this. Why is there something rather than nothing?
There is something rather than nothing.
Yep.
So now that you are here, you might as well get the best out of it.
If you like my philosophical content and wish to see more of it, Help get my channel off the ground by remembering to like, share, comment, and subscribe.